Okay, so welcome back to part 2 of Mr. Rusty's new rice pipe. I guess the fact that you've come back and are watching this suggests that you are either a bit of a car enthusiast or just incredibly bored in lockdown 2 and can find nothing better to watch. Assuming you are an enthusiast, what we thought we'd do, rather than just bundling straight into the fitting of the pipe, we thought we'd try and add a bit of interest and detail in this. So if that's not for you, just obviously skip through to the end bit where we get on and fit the pipe. But if you are interested in this stuff in a little bit more detail, what I'd certainly recommend you do is have a look at a YouTube channel called How a Car Works. And in that channel, a chap called Alex, he's actually dismantling one of these cars. We're dismantling an MX-5, and then he explains each component in a real level of detail. Now, clearly, Alex has a significant amount of automotive engineering understanding, and yet he presents that in a very accessible way at whatever level you're coming to it. So really, yeah, really interesting. If you're new to cars and just want to get a little better understanding of your own car, fantastic channel I'd recommend having a look at. What I'll do is I'll put a couple of links in the description to that. So two of his sections, one being how the full exhaust system on this car works, and then the second one is how the silencers in particular are designed and engineered. And it's really fascinating stuff. He cuts the silencers apart and takes you through how they function. So what you'll get to see there is the internal workings of what we're looking at on the underside of this car. So yeah, highly recommend that. So anyway, in part 1 of our video, Mr. Rusty's new rise pipe, we had a look at the Nismo sports system that was fitted to our Z car. And if you remember, that Nismo catback system gave us an additional 6 brake horsepower and 3.5 pounds-feet of additional torque, and it cost £1,200. But in fairness, it is a beautifully engineered, beautifully designed, beautifully engineered and produced sports exhaust pipe. It gives you exactly what you want in a sports exhaust pipe. So when you're on the gas, you get a nice sporty note from it, which adds to the driver's experience, the sporting experience, without being intrusive. And yet when you come off the gas, it falls quiet, so you can cruise quite quietly for you and your passengers, and also you don't disturb your neighbours if you're coming back late at night or leaving early in the morning. So it is a well-designed pipe, really good. But as I say, that was £1,200 for an additional 6 horses. So just to put those additional 6 horses into context, when I bought my current Z car there, I overlapped for about a month between buying that one and selling my old car. So I had 2 generations of the Z car sitting side by side on the drive. And my first car was one of the original Z cars from 2003. And that came with what was known as the DE engine. And that produced 275 brake horsepower. Now, just as a bit of an aside, that number is quite key, because around that time, all of the major manufacturers came to a bit of an unwritten gentleman's agreement that they would limit the power outputs of cars moving forward to 275 brake horsepower, because there was concern that legislation was going to be brought in otherwise to curb the bit of the arms race power struggle that had been going on amongst the manufacturers. So you'll notice that a lot of cars from that era, the Subaru Imprezas, that type of thing, will all have a similar figure of 275 brake horsepower. Now, clearly that gentleman's agreement fell apart reasonably swiftly, and power numbers have gone up and up and up ever since. But some of the legislation we're now going to see imposed on us in the next couple of years probably has resulted from that. and with the benefit of hindsight, a bit of self-regulation and self-control may have been more beneficial to the enthusiast driver. But there we are, a bit of an aside there, but we are where we are. But so the first year model of the Z had 275 brake horsepower. This one here that we have today is one of the last models produced before they went over to the 370Z. So this is from 2009. This has the HR engine, which is a significantly changed engine, still a 3.5 litre V6, but significantly changed from the DE engine. So this is the HR engine, and it produces in standard tune from the factory, it produced 309 brake horsepower. So we had the first car with 275, the second car with 309, so 34 brake horsepower difference. And I was fortunate enough to have both of these cars sitting side by side on my driveway for a month. Now normally when journalists do comparisons of the original car to the next evolution of it, they'll be referring to their notes from the original test drive. They probably won't have driven the original car for months, if not years. So I was in quite a nice position to be able to explore both. And on a daily basis, I was driving them back to back, so I could do a direct comparison. And if I'm honest, on normal road driving, I could detect no real difference in performance between the two cars. So, okay, maybe I wasn't driving it correctly. But interestingly, journalists who were measuring performance quite scientifically also came to the same conclusions. And the performance figures between the two cars are, there's negligible difference, despite having a 34 brake horsepower advantage. Now, in fairness, the HR engine is very different, not least by the fact that it has an additional 1,000 RPM to the red line. So this one revs out to 7,500 RPM, whereas the DE engine redlined at 6,500. So when you're up at Thruxton, halfway around one of the long bends there, whereas in the DE you'd be bouncing off the red line and needing to change up mid bend, this car has a lot greater flexibility, and that translates back to a more flexible drive in road driving. But in absolute terms, the performance would be very similar between the two cars. It's just the way they do it. So if we relate that back to exhaust pipes, so that was a 34 brake horsepower differential. If we think of the Nismo exhaust pipe, which we then got, that added an additional six brake horsepower. And so a good sports exhaust, and I emphasize the word good because if you buy a cheap one, it'll be terrible. If you buy a good quality sports exhaust for any car, it will add somewhere between 5 and 10 brake horsepower, 10 if you're lucky, depending on the restrictions of the original car design. But that will cost a big chunk of cash to do that. And as we said, if I'm not noticing the difference between 34 brake horsepower, highly unlikely you're going to notice a difference between 5 or 10 brake horsepower. And this was the point in the conclusion and the recommendation I was making towards the end of the first video, was that unless your exhaust is in need of replacement and is rusted through, spending multiple hundreds of pounds on a sports exhaust system to gain 5-10 horsepower isn't necessarily the best place to spend your money. What I would strongly recommend is you invest those few £100 on getting yourself some high quality roadcraft advanced driver training. And investing in your own driver skills will unlock the potential within your own car in its standard state of tune more than any exhaust system and a few extra horsepower ever will. And the other benefit, as we said in the original video, is that investment, that money you've invested in yourself, will then transfer to whatever car you go on to drive. So just something to think about there, and that would be my advice based on my personal experience of spending quite a bit of money on tuning and modifying cars.
This looks good, doesn't it? Look at that view in the distance there. So, got this road to yourself now. Where are you going? Where are you going? Come on. go offside here, just away from that farm entrance. Puts you in the nice line for the bridge. Bit of a jump over the bridge, not much. And then near side position, off the gas, near side, just watch these potholes. Gas and offside, full offside, that's it. Yes. Off the gas now, let the hill run third gear slow you down. Off the gas completely. Wait for your view to open then, wait. Good. Off. Again, just wait for that view to open up.
So I'm not leaving it on too long on that bit.
Yeah, just a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. There's a right-hander at the bottom of the hill, and there's a speed limit off to your left. But it's a good distance away at that speed limit, you're alright. You can take a full offside position there, squeeze the gas in third gear around here, keep it balanced, keep it near side. That's it, just because of that oncoming truck. Off the gas now. Just let it roll down now. Good.
And that's the thing, on those where the surface is smooth,
Yeah.
this feels fine. It's
Yeah.
anything, just those undulations, and
Yeah.
it throws the back.
Yeah. It's almost those ones that are a little bit like a washboard.
Yeah.
You get that washboard effect, and
Yeah.
it just unsettles it, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's a good description.
Yeah.
And then it starts tramping.
Yeah. Nice view of your road in the distance there. Don't be too shy of holding third gear. And I know you probably felt like it was a criticism on that last test that you did, but it wasn't. You were just probably not quite picking the right road for it. But this is definitely one where I'll be holding third gear for some time on here. Yep, straight line. You know, you're not right up in the upper reaches of the revs, are you? A bit of brakes here, please. So right-hander, near side. Position over there. Good. Straighten that one. And that one. Yep. This is great. What a cracking roll. Squeeze the gas.
This is where it's unsettling.
A little bit of brakes, now, just a touch. I think, to be fair, for various reasons, any other car will be unsettled now. Look at that extended view you've got down there, down the valley. Look at the road. You've got a view of about 1.5 miles here. I'm already thinking about where I'm going to overtake that van further up the road there.
Okay, so what we're going to look at now for the rest of this video, just to be clear, this is purely a cosmetic change to the exhaust tip. So we've talked a lot about power increases and exhaust systems. This is purely a cosmetic change to the exhaust tip on this car. As Alex explains, from an engineering perspective, the exhaust tailpipe serves no purpose other than to direct the gases typically to the back of the car, summer side exit, but typically just directs the gas flow out of the back of the car. And the chrome piece on the end, the exhaust tip, is merely a cosmetic enhancement to make it look pretty. It's a styling feature rather than serving any functional feature. So with the exhaust pipe that was on this car, as you can see, it had become rusty, had developed surface rust. But again, just to understand what you're looking at here, this is purely a cosmetic defect. Has no mechanical defect to the car. This car had its MOT inspection about 2 months ago. And as you can see, there was no mention at all of there being any problem with the exhaust system. The exhaust system is generally in good condition. Just worth mentioning that you can check the MOT history on any car that you may be interested in just by typing its registration number into this YouGov site. So just again, just being aware that you can do that and check the history of a car you're looking to buy. But so there was nothing mechanically wrong with it, with the exhaust system. So all we're looking to do is improve the appearance of the car because it got a little bit rusty at the back there. So really you've got a few options of what you can do here. The first, and what a lot of people would do, is just ignore it. If it's not offending your eye, it's not causing any problem. Though if you're watching this video and a car enthusiast, it will probably be causing you some degree of irritation. So perhaps the first and simplest solution, and bearing in mind we're considering how we've managed this on a budget, the simplest solution would be simply a pot of exhaust paint, high heat exhaust paint. So a little bit of sandpaper just to take off the light surface rust, and then apply special high heat paint designed for exhaust pipes. So that was a route I'd considered. I was thinking of doing it just with a bit of black high heat paint, high exhaust paint, and so very quickly you could transform the appearance and it would disappear to the back of the car. Second option is simply to fit a new bolt-on tail trim, and these now come in a variety of different styles, everything from the classic chrome, which would be in keeping with this car's age and sort of general styling, to looking to modernise the look with the sort of Japanese domestic market styling features such as the burnt tip, or the carbon fibre effect. Again, has become very, very on trend. So lots of things you can do, and essentially you just buy whichever design preference you have, and it comes with a bolt-on clamp. So you'd slip the new one over the existing pipe, and then simply tighten up a nut and bolt to clamp it in place. So relatively simple thing to do. Two things to make sure. Firstly, that the exhaust pipe is cold before you start working on it, so that the car have time to cool down so you don't burn yourself, and secondly that you do the bolts up tightly and securely so the thing isn't falling off. But very simple to do. What we've actually are going to have a look at doing now, and we'll take you through now, we've made it slightly more complicated than it needed to be. Couple of reasons for that. Firstly, our existing pipe was slightly misaligned, so there's a little arch cutout recess in the bumper which is designed for the tailpipe to sit neatly in. Ours wasn't fitted properly, so it's offset, and again, to an enthusiast's eye, that causes irritation. So we had a need to rectify that while we were rectifying the rusty problem. And the other thing, clearly this tailpipe was appropriately sized. It's the correct size. As Alex explains in his videos, you don't need huge bore exhausts, and the sort of pipe work from the front of the car to the back doesn't need to be huge. But in recent years, the styling trend has been towards larger tipped exhaust pipes. And actually Mazda, for the MX-5, they did what was called the Mazda Speed, which was a turbocharged version of this car. And we'd seen one of the exhaust tips on the Mazda Speed car, and we quite liked the look of that. It was a much larger tailpipe. So we were looking to emulate that and realign the exhaust pipe centrally into the arch. So that does require a little bit more effort and a little bit more work. And it's probably worth pointing out, if you are watching this, that if you were paying for the labour that we've put into it, it would probably have been cheaper to just buy an off-the-shelf replacement whole back box, the whole silencer for the car. Obviously, you'd then be getting a new silencer. It would also be very straightforward to fit. There's two nuts that secure the exhaust flange, the exhaust pipe flange, and a couple of rubber mounting hooks. So if you're paying for the labour, it'd be quicker for the garage to do that than to mess about with what's turned into a bit of a bespoke job for us. But given that we're in the midst of lockdown, our time is relatively plentiful and cheap at the moment, so it was a bit of fun in that respect. But just be aware, if you're paying somebody's labour, it may not be the most cost-effective way of doing it. So we'll now get to the back of the car and have a look, get the car up on some axle stands and have a look at how we're going to fit Mr. Rusty's new rice pipe. Okay, so we got Mr. Rusty up on some axle stands so we can have a look at the exhaust in a little bit more detail. Just thought we'd start at the engine end, just to put everything into context that we've been talking about, and relating that back to the suck, squeeze, bang, blow. And if we have a look here, this tube here, I'm hoping you can see there, is where the air goes in. So it's sucked in through there, winds its way round, and then into the air box. And as we looked at previously, inside that air box would be an air filter, which filters out any grit, dirt or particles that would be in the air and avoid that getting inside the engine. But the thing to notice is the size of that air intake. And as Jason at Engineering explained, will point out and do the maths behind it, if that's the size of your air intake, it highlights that if that's the amount of air going into the engine, you really don't need the channel tunnel size pipework to evacuate the exhaust gases from the back of the car. So I just thought that's an important point to note. But so the air is brought in, so it's sucked in, goes through the filter, as we've seen, through the airbox filter there, and along this pipework, and through the inlet manifold or plenum on more modern cars of the engine. And so it then goes into, it's sucked into this side of the engine. Now in the first video we talked in passing about NGK Iridium spark plugs, which we have here, and that is what a spark plug looks like, a little electrical component. So beneath each of these 4 cylinders, you will have one of those spark plugs, and a little spark jumps between the gap there, between the anode and the cathode, and that creates the bang. So we've got the suck phase where air is sucked into the engine as the piston goes down. As the piston comes on the upstroke, it compresses the air, so that's the squeeze phase, and then the spark plug ignites the petrol and the oxygen in the air to cause the bang. And after that, exhaust gases have to be evacuated, so they then come down through under this heat shield here is either the exhaust manifold or headers or collectors, as they are now known on modern cars, and that then disappears down underneath the car. So if we just pop down underneath the car, we can have a look at that in a bit more detail. So come with me. So we've got the car secured on an axle stand, and if we just get a little bit of light on this, what I'm hoping you can see there is that this item here is the catalytic converter, and that carries on along. If we follow the pipework along, we then get to the next large section, which is the silencer, which Alex refers to, and that's largely straight through but with some absorbent material. And then as we carry on along towards the back of the car, we can see the pipework disappears and comes out at the very back there in the large turbo or reverse silencer at the back there. And Alex explains why it's called a turbo and a reverse silencer. It's got nothing to do with turbocharging of the car. It's just the name for the silencer, as Alex explains in how a car works videos. So as you can see, and just relating back to what we saw in the MOT test, visually this exhaust looks in pretty good condition. So externally, the outer coating hasn't broken down too much. Typically the exhaust will go on the flanges here. You can see there's a bit of surface rust there, and we have been treating that on the back box, as we'll see in a minute. We've been treating that with a bit of cure rust. But it is a little bit deceptive because these exhausts actually tend to rot from within. So there's an awful lot of water created in the combustion process. So water collects inside the pipes, and particularly if your car is only doing short journeys. If on a short journey, the exhaust system, and particularly the back box right all the way at the back of the car, that won't be getting up to 100 degrees C. So it won't be boiling off any of the water creating and letting it exit as steam. So if that collects in the low points of these compartments, then it will rot through from within. But as far as we could establish from the service history of this car, this is a relatively recent exhaust system. So it should have a good few more years and tens of thousands of miles left in it. So that's why we didn't feel there was any need to replace it at this stage. So we'll now move around to the back of the car and have a look at the tailpipe itself. Okay, so we've actually turned the car around to get more daylight on our job, and we've got all our component parts now assembled. So the starting point for the project was really defining the tip we wanted, the aesthetics of the tip we wanted, because that will then influence everything else we do in terms of the pipework. And as we said, this is purely down to a matter of personal choice and styling. I particularly like the Mazda Speed 1, but also this tip with its rounded end there was very similar to the Nismo tips on my Nismo sports exhaust system. The other thing I particularly like, personal preference, all of these pipes are obviously fake. They're larger than they need to be, so they're all fake, but if you're going to fake it, do it well. And I like the way the shoulder here blends into the pipework, so it looks seamless. To my eye, I don't particularly like the ones which are just cut off and then obviously clunked onto a smaller bore pipe, but again, that's just personal taste. It's a fashion thing, nothing else. But so we got the end tip to our taste in stainless steel. And I would just say, if you're going to do this at all, if you're going to spend any money at all, get a decent one. The cheap ones you can get rust through very rapidly, so you're wasting your time and money. But the back end of that then defined the internal diameter of the pipe, determined the size of pipework we need. And this is a 63mm internal diameter. So then we had to buy a pre-formed 90-degree bend in stainless steel, Mandrel bent. So again, on exhaust pipework, if you just bend a tube, it will kink and make it not smooth in the inside of the bend, and that disrupts the gas flows, which is more important further along the exhaust system. But you want a Mandrel bent piece of pipework that then makes it nice and smooth for the gas flow. And so that then is the correct size and will slot into there. And as you can see, that starts to take shape. The challenge we then have is this is 63mm, our existing pipework is 54. So we need this piece, which will reduce it down from 63 to 54. So what we now have to do is we will look to offer this up under the car and take some very accurate measurements. So this is where measuring twice and cutting once comes into its own. We'll take some very accurate measurements, cut the two legs of the 90-degree pipe to the appropriate length, and once we've done that, this tip can be inserted and TIG weld round to secure it, and then the other end will simply be clamped on using these bolt clamps. So that's our plan. So I will crack on with that. I'll do a little bit of time lapse on this. I won't take you through obviously bore you with the whole process. And I want to spend a bit of time getting the measurements very accurate, so I'll be take quite a bit of time. The other thing, just to mention, we talked about high heat paint, and that being or very high heat paint, as it is 650 degrees. That was an option if we just wanted to just paint this and pretty it up. I'm actually going to be using that on the back box under here. Again, just cosmetically, so that will become nice and black. It will add a degree of protection, but Mr. Rusty's a bit of a hothouse flower. He doesn't tend to go out in the winter when there's rock salt on the road, but he does like to summer down at the beach when there'll be a lot of atmospheric salt, obviously from the sea. So it'll, as well as looking pretty, it'll also add an extra degree of protection to the outside of the box. So we'll crack on with that now. Okay, so as you can see, the old pipe has now been cut off, leaving a short stub coming from the silencer. This was where this expander reducer now slots on, and that then gives us a fixed reference point from which we can then take all other elements, all of the measurements rather. So if we then offer in the main pipe, as you can see at the moment, that's a long way off, so we need to cut that pipe to bring it across. So we'll take some measurements and then we can cut that and neatly move it across. And then having done that and got it centered in the arch there, we can then take some measurements and shorten the pipe this way, because obviously that would be a little bit long as it is at the moment. So that's the plan. So just need to take some careful measurements and we'll come back again with a bit of time lapse once we've done that. Okay, so we've done various cuts and reduced the length, and that's enabled us to offer it up to the car. And what we're now doing is just making a final adjustment. A little tip here, if you use a cable tie, put that around, you see we've made a pen mark at where we want it. If you just align the cable tie to that, that helps you to draw a nice neat line around it. Should be reasonably square. Just do that now. Okay, so that's our mark. This pipework is stainless steel, so it's a little bit harder than mild steel. So we've had to get the correct cutting disc for this. And then we've just got a little vise here. Again, just a bit of cloth there to protect it from the outside surface so we don't scratch that too much. And then, as I say, we've had to get a special stainless steel cutting disc, so you've got to make sure you get the right type. And we're just going to work our way around that line, putting our safety glasses on first. Now, an exhaust shop would have a special pipe cutting tool, which makes it easier and neater, but as you can see, as long as you're careful and gently work around with a stainless steel cutting disc, you can normally get a reasonably good finish on it. So we'll crack on with that and then come back a bit later when we've got it all mounted up. Okay, so we've taken some time cutting the pipe and making various adjustments, and we've now got it to a position that we're pleased with the fitment, and we think aesthetically it looks nice. It's within the confines of the bumper, so for safety and those type of MOT considerations. Obviously sellotape isn't a recognised MOT pass fitment method, so we will now just decouple it and TIG weld it securely, but the installation has actually gone in very neatly, so yeah, pleased how that's all worked out. It's one of those things, obviously, until you get the pipe work and start offering it up, it's difficult to know how it will work out, but that one's worked out very neatly. So we can, as I say, get that TIG welded and fitted securely now. We'll then high heat paint the back box, so that will go nice matte black colour, and I think that has enhanced the visual aesthetics of the car. So without changing its exhaust note or anything, it's just tidied up what was a rusty tailpipe. We have managed to get it nicely centralised within the arch there, which was our objective. So yeah, very pleased with that one. Hope you've enjoyed watching the process.